Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another meeting of the Resources Scrutiny Committee. My name's Councillor John Isaac, for all those many people listening to us on the web. So if I start with a few procedures first. Fire evacuation procedures. There are no fire alarms scheduled for this evening, but if the fire alarm sounds, it means we do need to evacuate the building. And the fire exit is located at the side of this room. Exit through reception and meet in the War Memorial Park. Not for too long, I hope, if we are out there in this on this very cold evening. The meeting is being webcast live on the internet and will be available thereafter on YouTube. Could I ask councillors to speak directly into your microphones so that it can be heard properly, and could you either switch off or turn to silent your mobile phones? We've got no members of the public wanting to speak to us tonight. I've got apologies for absence and substitutions. We've got Councillor Golding is replaced by Councillor Vaux. Councillor Lee is replaced by Councillor McCormack. Councillor Jenkin is replaced by Councillor Phillimore. We've received apologies from Councillor Julian Jones. I don't think there are any other apologies or substitutions. Nope. Any declarations of interest? None? Okay. Now, the minutes of the meeting held on the 23rd of July 2024, I circulated today the responses from officers to some of the questions that were raised, or the questions that were raised and minuted at that meeting. Is everyone happy both with the actual minutes and these additional responses that we received from officers, or any questions relating to any of those responses? Happy? Okay, good. And I think in future, discussing this with Ellie in Democratic Services, when there are points that we wish to be followed up by officers as a result of this meeting, that process will be led by you, and you'll get the answers that we request. Good. Okay. Thank you. Tonight, I welcome co-leader and the portfolio holder for finance and property, Councillor Gavin James. I think you're in the hot seat for both of the main parts of this meeting, Gavin, aren't you? That's why there's two of these. Great. We are going to change the agenda order because I've suggested that we do need to make sure we get through this evening the budget and the medium-term financial strategy for the next 4 years. Obviously, they are very important aspects of this council's work on behalf of residents, and I'm sure that the cabinet and the co-leader are going to be interested to hear what the committee has to say about your budget proposals. I imagine that you're not expecting protests on the streets as a result of these proposals.
Too cold.
Too cold, right? Yes, good. Okay, fine. So that will be item 1 on the agenda, and then item 2 will be the quarter 2 performance indicator reviews, and we've got a senior officer team with us this evening to answer any questions in relation to that. So if we start with the draft budget proposals for 2025-26 and the revised medium-term financial strategy for 25-26 through to 28-29. If I could invite Councillor James and the Chief Financial Officer Adam Swain to address the committee on your proposals. Thank you.
Good evening, committee, and thank you, Chair. As you've said, it's the draft budget. We're at that stage where obviously contributions, we're keen to listen to them and see if we've got things right and if we can change things. And the MTFS, Medium-Term Financial Strategy. For those of you new to the Council, every February we set a budget and a medium-term financial strategy. And that medium-term financial strategy is what happens if things carry on as we expect. Lots of forecasts go in there around interest rates and everything else. And then as soon as the elections are over, whoever gets this role then picks up the first year of that medium-term financial strategy, and that's the basis for their revenue budget. And so for the last few months, you've been working through it, reassessing what costs have gone up, what things have been unexpected, where revenue may have gone up or where it's gone down, and then make some changes and adjustments to basically we have to wind up with a balanced budget at the end of it, and that's what certainly the intention of this. What I will say as part of the budget process, we start then we get Rachel Reeves standing up in October. We have no idea what she's going to say, and even once she said it, we have no idea what it actually means to this council until December the 19th, when the individual councils will, we hope, find out on December the 19th exactly what that extra money means and what the changes mean, how much of the employee national insurance increase will be covered, etc. So this is on a draft basis of this is where we think we're going to be on our best estimate and judgment. It could change between now and when you see it again in February. So this year's budget, the key items really that are going in there and into the MTFS, there is a significant investment in waste. As you'll know, the government have said we have to introduce food waste recycling, and we're looking to bring that forward. We're quite keen to get that started. Obviously a very green way to go, and also recognising it does mean a big change for our residents. So we are keeping the current bin collection alongside that for a period, and that obviously adds to the cost. So we start with a limited increase, but then for a sort of a year, 18 months, it does jump up quite a bit whilst we run both sort of services side by side as the residents adapt to it. There's also £1 million towards the Green Team. The Green Team was introduced a couple of years ago by your good self, Chairman. It was a temporary 2-year thing, but I think the expectation was if it was successful, we'd keep it, and certainly we think it's successful. We're going to keep it. There's a lot more work to do. There is some additional money going into housing and homelessness. That is money that I think is specific grants from the government to support housing and homelessness, particularly amongst ex-offenders, and I think it's an important piece of work we need to do. The early release scheme often means early homelessness scheme, so we're having to adapt very quickly to those changes. There's a third of £1 million over the MTFS for improving our approach to tree management. We've got a lot of trees, a lot of them were planted, the wrong trees in the wrong places. That takes a lot of work to address, but at the same time we want to protect biodiversity. So there's a lot of work going on there. And enhanced weed removal is quite a small increase, but climate change does mean weeds are growing quicker and need to be addressed more frequently than we have done in the past. And excitingly, a new event. We've gone through our events programme and recognised perhaps there's an age group that's being missed out, those sort of late teens, early 20s age group that we don't really do anything specific with. Extreme sports and gaming. I know you're a keen gamer yourself, Councillor Isaac, so you'll be interested in that. And also there's some money put aside to set up the emerging anti-poverty strategy, which the council are developing. It's in our council plan originally. It's being worked on. It will come to committee, I think, towards the end of this year, maybe early next year, looking at how we bring all the agencies around the table to work together to tackle poverty in the long term. And so there's some money to get that started. So those are the key measures. We have worked quite hard this year to make it as easy as possible for people to see exactly what we're doing. So when you get to that first appendix, it really breaks down, this is what we're doing and this is how much it's going to cost or save. And obviously there's been a review of fees and charges that are also built into this. Again, within the report, you'll see the key ones pulled out. As you go through the detailed report, you can see all sorts of things that are happening. That fees and charges was essentially, we've run on everything goes up 3%. For a few years now, I think, which seemed to be the right thing to do because inflation was pretty stable. We've been through a few years of spikes in inflation, and now was a good time to go through and have a look and see what other councils are charging and what does it actually cost to deliver these services. So you'll see a few fees and charges have changed slightly differently to the normal 3%, and obviously those can be discussed as we go through. So that's essentially it. As I say, it may change, and just the final thing, there is obviously a capital budget as well. That goes on a very different journey to wind up in the same place in February. So this is just about the revenue, the day-to-day expenditure. The capital budget is being worked on as we speak, and will rejoin its fellow budget when we get to February. And that's my starting point.
Thank you, Gavin. Adam, do you want to say anything? You don't? Right, okay, fine. So, I'm sure all committee members have read through the draft budget proposals and the appendix, and it seems to me that the easiest way of dealing with this is to allow councillors who've got questions or points to make to do so in turn. If everyone's happy that we approach it that way rather than turning the pages, I think that's probably the most efficient way of making sure that we ask the relevant questions and scrutinise the budget. So, anyone like to start us off? Councillor McCormack.
Thank you, Chair. Appendix 1, a lot of different things here that, an accumulation of small increments and decrements in the budget. But the one that stuck out to me was the increase in charging for EVs, especially the non-rapid charge, going up by 61%. So why is it we're doing this when we've got EV charging at 43p per kilowatt hour while we sending it above 50p per kilowatt hour, when our domestic electric rates are less than 30p per kilowatt hour? And how does this sit with our stated objective of becoming a carbon neutral borough by 2030, when this looks like a strong disincentive to encourage the take up of electric vehicles because we're pushing up the charges? And I understand that this is replicated with other aspects of the budget increases, that basically other councils are charging more so we can get away with charging more. It seems to me like we're participating in some kind of cartel of price rigging.
Yes, I saw the same when that came through from officers. Obviously, with our fees and charges, primarily we're looking at cost recovery. We do not seek to profit from any of the fees and charges. Clearly, car parking generates significant revenue. However, EV charging is something that it's just cost recovery. So we install the machines, that's gone up slightly, it's more of a capital problem. But the cost of the electric, at the moment we are heavily subsidising the fast chargers. And whilst I'm as keen as anyone to get us going green, there is a point where you have to reflect on, is this something we want to subsidise? Is this something that we think that the residents and the taxpayers should be subsidising electric charge for those who can afford electric cars? Because generally speaking, electric car owners are probably not the most vulnerable in our community. So we're not seeking to profit anything, it is about cost recovery.
Chair, if I may redirect on that, I strongly dispute that, because other charge account, we're talking about not the increase in rapid charge rate. Rapid charge rate is a different kettle of fish. That's where you've got 100, 200 amp DC supply to a car that can take a rapid charge, whereas the charge points we've got outside are standard rate charge, so they're just AC mains. With very little in the way of conversion or any expensive equipment to deliver them. And I also take issue with the fact that we're saying that EV owners are better off people. We expect everybody to be buying new EV cars by 2035. This is something that's going to impact everyone, and it is going to disincentivise people who haven't made the switch yet. So I don't know. I think that's the wrong approach to say, oh, it's for the better off people. This should be for everyone, and I reject that. I don't understand how he can arrive at that conclusion when we're expecting everyone in the whole borough to participate in our desired objective of carbon neutrality by 2030. It just doesn't make sense.
As I say, it's cost recovery. And you know, with fees and charges, hang on a minute, with fees and charges, you have a choice. You either recover the cost or you pass the cost on to the general taxpayer. That's the choice. The view is that I listened very carefully to your question. I'm now giving you the answer.
You're not answering the question.
I am. Well, that's because you're interrupting.
You're not answering. You're saying it's cost recovery. I've given you evidence that says that other people, other companies, are providing it cheaper. I dispute that. Provide the evidence.
The advice from the officers is this is the cost, and we are recovering the cost. We can provide the evidence. I can get officers to come and show you the electricity bill. I don't know how they do that, but we'll find a way of giving you that evidence. But it is cost recovery. We are not making any profit from EV chargers, nor would I want to. We are just recovering the cost. And I didn't say that all EV chargers are rich. I'm just saying that when you consider which services we should subsidise and which we should recover the costs, we feel this is one that most fairly is one we just recover the costs from the person who obtains the electric.
So, Gavin, it might be helpful then if we could get the evidence provided by officers. All right, yeah, not now, no, but in a written. Yeah.
Yeah, so the cost per kilowatt hour is 56p. That is the cost for those charges at the moment. So we are currently subsidising. All the other local authorities running those at the moment in Hampshire are charging 56p. There are a few exceptions in, I think, in Wiltshire and in Buckinghamshire where they're slightly lower, but they might be on a different deal, and I'm not sure about those. But they were considered as part of the benchmarking. But the 56p is cost recovery and is in line with the other charges at a similar rate across other districts in Hampshire.
Right, thank you very much. Okay, anyone else? Councillor Carr, your hand went up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to pick up that conversation about fees and charges, because it was mentioned by the portfolio holder that there was a previous practice of looking primarily at 3%. It occurs to me that, you know, inflation at the moment is running, if you look at CPI, at about 1.7%. So I think all of our fees and charges probably need to be looked at in the context of inflationary uplifts. So I was struck by the proposed increase in most local car parking charges by 5%. And again, that's both well above our previous practice and well above current inflation. So there was a discussion in the papers about how that had been benchmarked against private and public sector providers. I wondered if the Cabinet member could reflect on whether increasing car parking charges will have a detrimental impact to the health of our town centre. And similarly, could he give us some information about the kind of benchmarking that has been undertaken?
Well, I'll leave Adam to go through the benchmarking exercise that was carried out in some detail. What I would say is it's very easy this year to say inflation is sitting around 2% and our fees and charges are 5%. Last year we increased fees and charges by 3%. Inflation was 8-9%. The year before it was 3%. Inflation was 8-9%. That 8-9% in those 2 years impacts on the costs. It costs us to provide the services we provide. It impacts on staff wages, etc. So whilst it is perhaps slightly higher, we have got 2 years of catching up. Now those increased costs that inflation brought to us cover the entire council. In terms of how you collect that money, you have the council tax, which you can only go to £5, which is about 3.4% for us. So that's well below the 8, 9, 10% we saw in inflation for the last 2 years. Fees and charges we want to keep fixed against the cost where we can. Certain things we do subsidise, such as for sports pitches. And so actually you don't have many levers to pull to make up that difference. One of the challenges we have as a council is there was a year where we froze council tax. Now that's cost us £350,000 every year forever. So we've got a deficit. Had that not happened, we might be in a different place of fees and charges, but having already given away that council tax increase, we now have to balance the budget somehow. So that ultimately leads to looking at some fees and charges and thinking, well, actually, what's right and fair that we could increase very slightly. And in fact, if you look at petrol costs, motoring is now probably a lot cheaper than it was 2 years ago, despite this increase. So it's a modest increase, and in many cases, it doesn't make a difference, because 3% would have been a 10p increase and 5% a 10p increase, because obviously you tend to increase parking in that way. So that's why we arrived at the 5% this year. It's just to bring costs back up to recover from the fact that we obviously had several years where we were increasing it below, which was probably the right thing to do at the time. What I'll say about town centre recovery, if you've been to the town centre, there are virtually no empty units at the top of town anymore. Festival Place has opened several stores. There is some hope around some of the other shop stores around. We've only got, I think, 2 empty units and 3 empty units in the Mals. We've got a lot of interest in one of them, obviously another one, potentially a post office. So we're actually seeing a real recovery, certainly in the daytime economy within the town centre. We've seen footfall increase, we've seen lots of new stores open. So we don't think it's going to have a detrimental impact. But obviously we'll monitor that, and we'll see how it works. But I doubt, given it's 10p, 20p, 30p, that it will make an impact if someone's going to town for the day to spend a couple of £100. I say the benchmark, it's not like they can go somewhere else cheaper, because we were in short stay parking, we were very, very cheap. In long stay parking and medium stay parking, we were sort of low to medium. But I'll let Adam explain the benchmarking exercise that we carried out.
Yeah, so officers have looked at this across other local authorities. So primarily Winchester and Reading were seen as kind of the nearest large towns where the draw is similar to ours. And again, our charges are around £1 to £2 cheaper for the short stay compared to Winchester and Reading. We also obviously looked at Festival Place as well for the Mals, as that's the direct competitor for that. And again, our charges were slightly under there, so we've reflected that in the Mals as well, to ensure that we're recovering the right cost there and generating the revenue as the co-leader has indicated. So that was the key principle. Where some charges are were kind of higher, we've looked at that, and the increases have either been frozen or slightly decreased. But generally, the increases are 5%, except for the Mals, where they were below the nearest competitor, which is obviously Festival Place, which is right next to it. So that was the basis of the exercise that was undertaken.
Thank you. Right, Councillor Carr, have you got
anything
anything
just one follow-up comment from that. It was striking that there was a proposal to introduce a £1 charge for £1 stays on a number of town centre car parks: Albert Yard, Caston's Yard, Feathers Yard, Jacobs Yard. It struck me as a bit curious to put a fee on a 1 hour stay. It felt to me a little bit punitive, and I wondered whether any studies had been undertaken about dwell times of an hour, how many people that's likely to pick up, because it strikes me that, I'm not sure we necessarily want to disincentivize short visits to our town centre if that can be avoided. I just wonder if the thinking on that can be explained.
You're absolutely right. I'm not sure either, is the honest answer, because when the free parking was introduced, there was sort of no analysis done of whether it made a positive difference or not. So we don't know. And what happened was, with a lot of the meetings that we have with top of town businesses particularly, but businesses in general, there was a sense that whilst the daytime economy had recovered well post-COVID, the nighttime economy really hadn't. And so the proposal was put within the cabinet setting of, should we be looking at introducing free parking for late nights? And then a sort of recognising you've got to pay for that somehow. And so one of the options was obviously to remove the daytime free parking. So then you kind of have to balance the pros and cons of both, and it'd be lovely to do both. But equally, there's actually question marks about the daytime parking. So some of the work we've done, it was anecdotal, we haven't got a mass data set to go by, was that, first of all, we couldn't find many people who came to town for free parking, because there's about 90 spaces at the top of town that have a free 1 hour. And so generally speaking, you'd be quite lucky to get one. So nobody was coming here specifically because there was free parking. People were coming here, and if there was free parking, they're clearly going to take it. And in some cases, they were taking it because they would take it and then do all they needed to do in an hour and get back to the car within the hour. And you then wonder, well, had you had to pay, would you have stayed for 2, maybe 3, maybe 4 hours and celebrated some of these new stores, shops, got your hair cut? There's plenty of opportunities for that at top of town. And bought a coffee as well, plenty of opportunities for that. So actually, do we want people to come into town for an hour, or do we want them to stay for 4, 5, 6, 7 hours and make a day of it? And so there's a sort of huge question mark there. Then on top of that, there is the view that versus nighttime, the vast majority of people in the borough, certainly sort of 60-odd%, I think, are, I don't know, everyone can walk or cycle that far, but are within walking and cycling distance of the town centre. Whereas at night, people are less inclined to walk and cycle because they don't feel safe. About 90% of the borough is a bus ride away from the town centre, whereas at night that drops to 0. And so you need to think about, well, actually, there's less choice. And if we want to go green, there is that argument that actually we should be encouraging more active modes of transport where possible, whereas those options aren't always available at night. So those things are put into it. And the other thing that was thought about was when the charging came in free originally, there was a lot of banks and post offices at the top of town. And the key grumble from residents, and one of the reasons the free 1 hour parking, it was 30-minute parking originally was put in, was I just want to go to the post office, or I just want to pay in a cheque. And that's very much the economy of 20 years ago. I don't remember the last time I saw a cheque. I'm not even sure they do cheques anymore. I think the nature of the top of town's changed as banking has changed. Most people's bank branch is in their pocket right now, switched to silent, and obviously the post office has moved. So I think it was a question mark whether it was still of value. But you're absolutely right. We don't know. We think there's an opportunity to boost the nighttime economy. We've seen the sports bar open. We've got the Labyrinth nightclub opening. We'd like to support those venues, particularly whilst we work through the taxi shortage that exists. And so we want to try that. And to cover the cost of that, we've looked at removing that 1 hour free parking. The great thing about budgets is you can do things and try them. And we're going to try and make sure we do a lot more analysis of behaviour change to see whether or not that's right or wrong, because it is easy to change it next year if we think we've got it wrong.
Thank you, Gavin. Right, okay. I saw Councillor Vaux, your hand went up, and then Councillor Phillimore.
Your question wasn't related to Sam's. Thanks, Chair. Also on fees and charges, I was really struck by the increases for sports, the charges going to football, rugby, cricket, etc., because they seem quite high. 10% for rugby and cricket, 8% for football, and for some reason 26% for Pentique. So quite a lot. I mean, I read here that this is about an average cost recovery of 18% across all sports. But so my two questions are, why so high, given cost of living rises? I know you've given some information about previous years and how, perhaps gaps have grown, but I'm also mindful that these clubs, a lot of them are struggling because of their own increase in costs. A whole range of issues, particularly around cost of utilities. Just about everything has gone up for these clubs, and a lot of them are finding it really, really hard to raise the money required to keep going. So I wanted to ask about do we really have to put these charges on, and where did the 18% cost recovery come from? Is that why have you chosen 18%? Thanks.
Yeah, I think the 18%, as I say, this is one that's obviously subsidised and rightly subsidised. Will always be subsidised by the public because we want our people to be fit and healthy and go out and be competitive and play sports, and we all love sports. So it's heavily subsidised. So this was more of a benchmarking exercise where we've looked at what other councils are currently charging and making sure we pitch ourselves to the lower end of that average. Certainly the new charges would be, I think, less than Rushmore and certainly less than Winchester. East Hampshire, I looked at, they don't do sports pitches. So it's that kind of exercise. I mean, we say 18% cost recovery. Obviously, if they weren't sports pitches, we'd still have to mow the grass. So there's an element of it's not that much. But ideally, you wouldn't want to put them up. But there is that choice to make about at what point do you where's the line between free and full cost recovery, and at the moment it's pitched at 18%. It's worthy of debate, but again, of course, you have to balance that budget. We've got to finish with a zero, so if we didn't do it, it's what else we could do, and that's why we have this exercise and this listening exercise. If that's the view of council, then we can go back and look at it, but it will mean something else going up to compensate for that.
Thank you, Chair. So for me, I think it's about the materiality for each of these clubs. I think that it may not be about which is the 10%, which is the 8%. Some clubs have got more income and more resilience than others. What we wouldn't want is these charges to actually mean some clubs stop functioning. And it's also the materiality of actually how much money this is actually bringing in. I'm sure it's here somewhere, but I didn't find it. What it's, I'm sure Adam can tell me. I'm sure it's absolutely at his fingertips. And thinking about the cost benefit of that, the materiality of what we're getting out of this, given the impact it may well have on, as we've said, sporting facility, which I think are absolutely vital for the health and well-being of our borough population.
I mean, what I will say, we've had conversations about this. It equates to 20 pence per player, around 20 pence per player if you've got 22 plus 2 subs, etc. That every pitch higher is 20p. So and these things, certainly when I was a kid, and it may have changed, and when my kids were kids, you go in with your £1.50 or whatever it is that you pay to the club, to the team you play for, you pay your subs. Obviously, I appreciate football boots have gone up a lot more, and I'm sure football kits have gone up a lot more. And that's adding pressure to parents, but also the cost of the staff that are cutting the grass, painting the white lines has gone up by more. I mean, it hasn't gone about 18%, but you look at 18% plus 3% plus 3%. One of the big increases was the fuel cost, of course, even though most of it's biodiesel. The cost is very similar. So that's gone up over the last few years, a lot more than 3%. So it's about that sort of, if we wanted to give a bigger discount than we currently are, we could, but we'd have to look at raising those charges elsewhere. I mean, certainly, it's a difficult one. We have to make a choice and fall somewhere, and that's where we are at the moment. But, if the committee want us to go and look at that, then we can look at it. But I say the alternative generally is to go back again and look at parking or some of the other fees and charges and see whether we can find the money another way. But in terms of the actual amount, Adam will have the number.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's not just off the top of my head. I do see the matrix most of the time, but no, I think the income forecast from sports last year was around 130,000. This would increase it to about 146, so it's relatively small. But part of the proposed increase as well is to try and equalise some of the recovery positions. So some sports the recovery cost is higher than others, still all being subsidised, but that's part of it. And also previously, prior to last year, there was a VAT charge on these fees. That was dropped last year, so that was a 20% reduction in the fees. So while there are increases, there was a saving to the clubs, and that of 20% of not having to pay the VAT last year. So, but we obviously take the views, recognise that this is challenging as officers. If we can have a look and reflect on those comments.
Thank you. Right, Councillor Phillimore, I think you're next.
Cheers, Chairman. Mine is a twofold inquiry, really, on public transport savings and supported bus services via Hampshire County Council on page 90 and page 91. We're saying that we got £30,000 saving on one, £60,000 saving on the other. We got 3 operations where the budget exceeds the cost of the service, so it's proposed to reduce the budget on public transport savings. But on the supported bus services, we've got a few services that now don't need a subsidy, according to this paper. But with the precarious position of the Tory-controlled Hampshire County Council, there are additional areas of expenditure we may be asked to undertake, certainly in terms of reduced public transport for our residents. For instance, in my ward, we've slashed the service from Winchester to Whitchurch and Basingstoke to about 1 or 2 services a day. and there's a bus that goes around the village in Overton for pensioners to get to the shops, the surgery, the libraries, that is under threat from Hampshire County Council. And my point being, if we're reducing some of these subsidies, can't they be redirected elsewhere?
At the moment, we've recognised that as a saving. So we used to subsidise some of the bus services. It's not uncommon when we get a new development that 106 subsidises the bus for a period of time. And as the new development reaches critical mass, the bus becomes economically viable, at which point Stagecoach are happy to take it and run it because it's a good bus service and make some money. And so that's identified as a saving that we won't need to support that bus service because it's self-supporting. In relation to Hampshire County Council, obviously their responsibilities around public transport are considerable. They do receive government money, which is supposed to be ring-fenced for bus services. I think it's about £700,000 a year they get from the Department of Transport, which was originally under the original Bus Act, where you tender out your bus services on a commercial operator, then they're given this pocket of money to then subsidise other services. I think they're diverting that money into home-to-school transport, where they've got a massive budget deficit. There is no way, unfortunately, that we will be able to cover everything the county drop. We know that the county council have to save something like £175 million over the next 12 months. Our annual budget isn't 175 million, and I appreciate not all of their services hit Basingstoke, but if you break that down per authority, there's probably about 30 million quid's worth of services for this borough. We just couldn't cover them all. So I wouldn't commit to anything. We've got pressures around homelessness, and the fact that the county have said in a year's time they're dropping support for that. And how do we deal with that and absorb that cost? And we don't want people living on the street. So again, we'll come down to choices. What I would really strongly encourage is people to use their local bus service as much as they possibly can, because if it's profitable and you use it, it will keep running. It's those buses that aren't used very often that are the ones, unfortunately, that will face the axe. But it's an issue for your county councillor, who I'm sure is dedicated to the cause of Overton.
Just to answer, I mean, some of these are critical services because they're transporting students to places like Peterson and stuff like that, which they've had a choice to go to.
Again, education, home to school transport is a county responsibility. We can't fill all of them. Some of those children, they will have to provide that transport too. If that's their local school or local college, then the county will have some responsibilities. But it's some work to do at county, which I'll be doing over the next couple of weeks. To see where they're going with all their stuff, but we wouldn't be able to cover it all. I wouldn't like to promise we can cover it all.
Right, thank you. Councillor Tony Jones, I think, was next.
Yeah, yes, sorry. It's concerning the sports, where I think we should be looking at that again. We actually, during the year, as we say, we must get youngsters out there, must do this, must do that. Next minute they're putting up the fees. And if I'm perfectly honest, I went through this last night, is that there's less sport being played in this borough per head than what there was when it was a small borough, and football teams, things like that. There's different reasons for it, but boys and girls football teams, they need subsidy. What's been, parents have been under pressure. It's not just a matter of paying for the actual pitch. It's a matter of kit and everything else and that goes with running a football team. Transport sometimes. It's not just one parent running them around. It's usually the whole lot. There's a cost in that for parents, and I think it's something we should really look at closely, because as I say, we do keep on in this borough, which is rightly so, about health of the borough. And to my mind, it's something we should be looking at. Thanks.
Thank you. I think Colin Fillamore, you...
I'll just come back on that, and I don't want to be too supportive of Adam and Gavin, but I'm heavily involved in sport, and some of the sporting organisations that we support have had a 50% raise in their core funding over the last year.
Right. Any other questions or comments? Councillor Vaux.
Thank you. I was a bit baffled by the extreme sports and gaming event. Yeah. And some of that is because I kind of get the extreme sports and I get the gaming, but I didn't understand whether this event was a combined extreme sports and gaming, which are actually quite disparate event, or is it an extreme sports gaming event, which is a specific genre in itself? I hope you're impressed that I know that. So I did want to have a little bit more information about it. I did read the impact assessment about it, and that it was going to be a free event. I think it was in August in the town centre, and it's, £280,000 is a lot of money. If I've understood correctly, how much money we've put against it. And I wondered, are we doing this all by ourselves? Are we getting other people in to help it? And I'm slightly uncomfortable that it's another event in the town centre. And I wondered if we should be spreading this kind of event a little bit wider. Thanks.
I think it's fair to say it's in its infancy as to what it is, how many events it is, and where they take place. Because, like you say, I can't imagine that we're going to try and design an event where you can be on your skateboard playing Halo 7 or whatever it is. So I think there's a work to do. Obviously, there is no budget now. The 280,000 is over the MTFS period, so it's about £70,000 a year we're putting aside as an indicative. This is the envelope. Go on, events team. What can you create that's amazing? And so, obviously, as we get down the line with the budget being approved, then we can know what that event looks like, and we'll shape it very quickly. And our events team will probably come back to the relevant committee and talk them through what the actual event looks like. But at the moment, they can't spend an awful lot of time and effort designing something that hasn't got a budget. So it's in the budget for now. It's an indicative, and then Kerry, who understands these things much better than I, and Daniel Garnier, who's definitely a gamer. And obviously, once it's paid for, Adam will go out on a skateboard and show you what you can do.
So is this a virtual event?
I think it's virtual, and the E bit is virtual. So I'm not quite sure what that's going to look like. Obviously, the more extreme sports stuff is going to be, I mean, it could be a climbing thing put in the middle of Market Square, for all I know. So again, it's looking at esports, recognising they're hugely popular with a generation that doesn't perhaps get involved in the community in our events programme as much as we'd like, but also it's a similar age group that we've got some incredibly talented people. If you ever go past a skate park, don't understand a word they're saying to each other, but some of the skills are incredible. And how would we showcase that, bring it out, and make a bit of a competition of it? So I think it's, as I say, until it's got a budget, it's hard to define what it's going to look like, because at this stage in February it could die. So we're saying this is in our draft. We want to create something a bit special for that age group, looking at perhaps one event, maybe several events. It's clearly, I think there'll be a virtual event and there'll be a non-virtual event, but the virtual event might be getting people out of their bedrooms and using some of the facilities in town. If you've been to the new sports bar, the Post Box as it's called, they've got the VR golf. I'm surprised I haven't seen you in there in the rain yet, but it's a fascinating thing. We could do some more of that and get people involved. So I can't give you much more detail. One, because I don't really understand the technology. I don't understand the youth, but also we haven't got the budget yet.
No, but it does seem rather ill-defined, and it's not quite clear where this has come from, whose big idea it is, and you are coming forward with budget proposals, and they're clear. You're looking to spend £70,000 a year over the next 4 years of residents' money. You're not looking for anyone to pay for this, and so I think some residents might sort of scratch their heads and say, why is this regarded as something that is a priority that should go into the budget?
Well, I think at this stage it's about the principle of, do you think our events should touch people of all age, and do you think we're doing enough for this particular age group, and we should try and do more? So it's more of a question, but I'll certainly speak. It's Councillor Morrow and Daniel and some people in the sports team that are sort of working this up, and I'll get them to come back with a written answer with the detail they've got so far, so you're better informed than I am tonight.
Thank you, Owen. You want to follow on this, do you? Yes, right. Okay, Tony.
It sounds really good, and I think that the principle of getting different age groups, younger age groups involved is good. But then you're actually doing the opposite by putting the fees up on the sport, and it makes a nonsense of the whole thing. And it really needs you've got a budget there, as you say, it may come out in February, but we need more information. You know, is it, you know, what are you actually doing? You know, extreme sports. How many people take part in extreme sports? Or is it, or are we only talking about, I don't know what they call these days, skateboards and different things, which maybe the youngsters still do. But we're supposed to be here scrutinising it. We can't scrutinise something we can't see or don't know anything about.
There seem to be some reservations about that coming.
No, I think just to Tony, but that's exactly what scrutiny is for. Yes. Is to actually challenge and say, okay, we like the principle, but we're not sure. We want more information, and that's scrutiny, and we send you the information.
Yeah, right. I think we had was it Councillor Carr?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, I agree. I agree with Councillor Jones on this. I think there's real concern in the room about more money being taken out of our sporting communities, of existing sporting communities that provide, you know, joy and fulfilment to our residents. And I think I heard it said that there's a proposal there with the numbers to extract £16,000 from our sporting communities. I'm not sure if that's per year or over the NTFS period. It'd be useful to get a clarification on that. But what's odd to me is this contrast of taking away money from residents for sporting activities that work and people enjoy, and it is made more expensive to just, you know, go down to the football pitch for a night. And then there's a proposal from this administration to bring an unformed, unclear, chaotic, sort of strange idea that really is in its infancy, and to seek our endorsement for £70,000 a year for 4 years. I think if this proposal raises its head again in February, it needs to have a clear plan and it needs to have some detail attached. And I think a lot of work will need to be done to justify the price tag of £70,000 a year of taxpayers' money, because it feels like frittering money away, I'm afraid, while charging more for sports that people in our borough enjoy.
Thank you. Right, Councillor Tuck.
I wasn't going to talk about this one, but actually as it's the topic at the moment, I mean, I do think we don't do enough for that younger demographic. We do lots for little children and families, and then old ones like me. But I do think that young people don't have anything particularly that we're organising or doing. I think it's wrong to concatenate that with the subsidy that we already provide for sport. And I understood that the budget changes that we're looking at for sporting activity, which I do wholeheartedly support, that we subsidise some of our sporting thing. It was to look at spreading that more evenly across the different sporting categories. It was not about not subsidising. It was about evening out that degree of subsidy. At least that's what I understood. So it'd be great. I agree. We do need to understand better. I think it's an embryonic idea for the event for the young ones, and it probably needs working up. I wanted to thank you for page 79 on risk management, sensitivity and contingency plans for the budget, which I found very helpful, especially seeing the impact of the 1% change in sensitivities. That was really helpful to me. And to understand that employee costs, business rates, rent income and investment income are key issues. You mention in this paper the fact that we've had a budget that's thrown everything in the air. Can you flag to me what, if you know, what in the missive we're expecting in December? Is there anything that you're feeling a little bit more nervous about than anything else?
I'm nervous about everything.
I'll start by I should buy a lottery ticket if I can predict that. I think the budget obviously indicated the increase in national insurance, which would have a significant impact, but the government have indicated that local government will be compensated for that. I'm expecting nearly full compensation, but they have said it's not going to be done on an individual council by council basis, so we're unsure on that. They did indicate in the budget there would be a 3.2% real increase in core funding to local authorities, but that's across the sector. where that's targeted, the upper tier and unitaries where there are the challenges in adult social care and children's social care may get more of that funding. So that 3.2% real increase might not fully apply to our funding, and we've assumed a lower level than that at the moment in our assumptions. There's other things around some of the waste changes where there's additional income potentially coming from the extended producer responsibility, which is the charge that packaging producers will pay. But again, that's not clear at the moment, and that's not been assumed in here. So there's a bit of a balance in this, and we have to make assumptions at a point in time that will that obviously feed into what is here and went to cabinet a couple of weeks ago. But we will have the information in December, which will then set out the actual proposed allocation. I hasten to add that is the draft proposal. They will then provide the final proposal in February. And last year we did get an additional increase last minute, which was quite unhelpful, and it does present a challenge in planning. But we do the best we can to make the right assumptions that are realistic, but obviously not overly optimistic, which I think is what I've set out as part of the assumptions in this draft budget proposals.
I mean, there's good news in that there's nothing I heard in the budget would indicate we're going to get significantly less than what we're facing right now. It's likely to be more, but that could be 50 quid or it could be $500,000. We just don't know. The good news is, though, the government have assured us is the last year of this annual ridiculousness of me pressing refresh, and I'm sure Councillor Isaac did before, every December, week before Christmas, waiting to find out what you're getting. Because they will set a 3-year full spending review, and then you'll get a 3-year rolling programme, which makes everyone's life a lot easier. The bad news is that means they're doing a big review next year, and that big review, from what we've heard, indicates obviously a lot more money going to upper tier authorities, and also a lot of more money going to areas of high deprivation and areas, essentially a lot of it's going to go to the north. So if you're in a low deprivation area, which we are, and not an upper tier authority, there is a risk that next year's big change, whilst we'll have some certainty, may be quite painful. We don't know, but we are mindful because of that change coming. We wouldn't want to commit too much this year if suddenly next year we get a shock. So that's but that's how uncertain. We can only go with our best judgment, and this is our sort of mid-case scenario point of view.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Carr.
Thank you, Adam, for that update. It sounds like Labour's really left us in the dark, and this national insurance rise on employers is going to present a very considerable cost to the borough. Do we have a number on how much Labour's national insurance rise will cost the borough, so that we can sort of see how much per year we would need for that to adequately compensate?
As I did actually indicate, Councillor Carr, the expectation is that local authorities will be reimbursed for the national insurance increase, as will the rest of the public sector. The cost of the national insurance increase would be around 650,000 a year, based on that. So that's what we're expecting to be reimbursed to us. But obviously there are knock-on impacts with suppliers and others which may have an impact, although we do take account of some of those in some of the budget proposals already.
Right, thank you. Councillor Vaux.
If I could just follow up on that a little, Adam, because my concern is it's a bit like with the NHS situation. There are organisations who provide services for councils, and that councils also commission. It's the same with the NHS. Some organisations appear to be able to have their national insurance increases offset, and even that's a little bit tenuous how long that offset will last. Is it just a year or so? So could we just take that question on a little bit, is not just what's the impact for us, which is potentially 650k, but we hope to get that back, but do we have any sense of any organisations for whom that could be a significant cost increase? So some of those will be charities like the BVA and others where that we commission quite a lot to support us in what we do. So have we got any analysis of the impact on them?
At this stage, no, we don't, and obviously it's an emerging position on that, and we haven't had any contact at this stage that I'm aware of that's requesting that. But obviously that is a consideration that could have an impact. Until we get the final settlement from government, we don't know kind of exactly what that is. I would imagine the compensation would be included as part of our core spending power, which is the annual ongoing grant funding. So that NI increase should be covered in future years. But I do take your point around other parties. It is, yes, as you say, the charity sector and the impact that we work with them, but it's also around, Circa, obviously with the waste and leisure contract and others as well. There are potential impacts there, but that has not come forward yet at this stage, and that's obviously for those organisations to work out as well and digest the budget. So at this stage, I can't say to you the exact figure of what that would be.
Okay, anything else? I've got a few, if I may.
No, sorry.
Well, actually, they're technical questions, so I thought I might divert them. It might be better going to Adam. So, Adam, we are assuming, unusually, that new homes bonus is going to continue, and that's counted in the years ahead of the MTFS. Are you happy? Are you comfortable that you're making an assumption that we are going to be getting? But he has to sign it off, Gavin. Yes.
As you point out, I am obviously responsible for the robustness of the budget. We've assumed new homes bonus. That might be rebadged as something else. What we've actually assumed is that the core funding that we receive at the moment, including new homes bonus, will remain broadly at that level. The reason for that is that if there were to be some changes in funding, cutting a significant chunk, not necessarily just from ourselves, but would apply across the board and would probably have a significant impact on district councils across the country. So we assume that the core funding that we receive at the moment with a small inflationary increase is a likely central case scenario. Let's say the spending review next year will give us more certainty, but in the absence of knowing the future of new homes bonus specifically, we've included that as part of that core funding at the moment, as I felt that was realistic into the future rather than assuming nothing, which is previous assumptions around that led to large deficits that haven't materialised over previous years, and the funding has continued. And as I say, I think realistically, while we may struggle, others would be pushed under and into Section 114 territory if new homes bonus or an equivalent funding source was just cut overnight.
Okay. So next area of comfort I'd like to ask you about is reserves. So under this MTFS, we're looking to reduce reserves by 3.18 million, 4.15 million, 3.92 million and 3.62 million over the 4 years. Are you, I think there's going to be a full review of reserves undertaken reporting in February. Can you give us some insight into what's going on here?
So as was indicated at the start of this, the MTFS is obviously set over many years. Some of these reserve reductions are previous reductions that were already assumed as part of that drawdown. And as you mentioned, we will obviously do a review of reserves to ensure they're appropriate levels, and look at whether the balances are appropriate to address the risks that I consider within the budget. So take into account the uncertainties around business rates and things like that. So yes, so there are some adjustments there. There are also some contributions to risk reserves and spreading as well, where there's surpluses in earlier years that will obviously then use in later years to address any budget gaps that may appear.
Yeah, because obviously we need to look to you to make sure that we maintain sufficient reserves, Chief Financial Officer. Right, the next one is, and you may need to take the Fifth Amendment on this, but there's a reference in the budgets to savings on management structure review, but there are no details. And it's 240,000, 440,000, and 440,000. Are you able to make it enlighten us at all about that, or would you rather not do?
I think all I will say on that is there are ongoing kind of reviews of how the council delivers various things. I don't think there's any grand plans in terms of what that means at this stage. There's some obviously savings that we all wish to make in terms of efficiencies, introduction of new technologies and things like that. So it's reflective of some of those and some changes potentially of kind of how we deliver things. But at this stage they are kind of high level, and I wouldn't want to go into detail at this stage.
Right, thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Carr.
Yes, I wanted to touch upon that December local government settlement again. So one of the decisions in this budget proposal is to raise council tax again, and the cabinet member has spoken about his sort of attitude that councils give away money when it's always taxpayers' money, and we will probably never agree on that. But what I wanted to touch upon was the current decision to raise council tax up to the 2.99% point. If in December there's a decision from government to raise referendum limits for local authorities, will this cabinet commit tonight that it will not seek to chase that referendum limit? If it's comfortable it has a balanced budget proposal at 2.99%, will we get a commitment tonight that we will not see a proposal to rise further than 2.99%? After all, the cabinet member feels confident that he can balance the budget on that figure, but the government may raise that figure. So I think this council probably needs some certainty from him that we will not chase the referendum limit or not. I think there's a real question there.
Well, I certainly wouldn't chase the referendum limit needlessly. Like you say, if all things being equal, we've got a £5 increase at 3.4%, obviously, which is what we're putting forward. It was in the MTFS and it's repeated every year. That's our intention every year. We think it's a reasonable level because it is pretty much inflation matching. And at the moment, there is no need. So I'd love to be able to make the promise, but as we've just discussed, come December the 19th, at the moment, all things assumed, if we are in the same position or a better position, we have no intention of changing the original £5 that we put forward last year and the year before and every year. So, but I'll just draw slightly short of making an absolute promise, because we could be shocked and suddenly wake up and find we're about £1.5 million down because the new homes bonus has gone and not been replaced, and the medium funding guarantee has just been ripped up and thrown apart, and so we don't know. So I will have to hold a little bit of leeway. So I'm sure you'll imagine, at the moment, my assumption is I can't see how we end up with less, and therefore it'd be £5. But there's always that risk that if the numbers come out badly, we are left in a position where we have to do something. Then it is increasing fees and charges, or it's increasing council tax, or it's getting rid of services. And so we'll have to make that choice at the time. So I can give you my 99% assurance. And certainly there is no intention on my part or the Cabinet's part to change away from that £5 if we are given the opportunity to do something else. But we'll have to reflect the world we live in come January.
Okay, right. You want?
Mr. Chairman, just a very, very short follow-up, if that's all right. I thank the Cabinet member for that 99.9% reassurance that he won't seek to tax us further than he's allowed to. I sympathise that the position of the Labour government is putting us all in real, positions of uncertainty. Now, I appreciate dealing with this Labour government must be very taxing for him. I'm sure he reflects that dealing with Labour on this council is similarly taxing. So I think this is something that perhaps we can talk to the Cabinet about following the 19th of December announcements from government.
Well, I think this role is always quite taxing. I mean, by definition, it has to be. But you're absolutely right. But I will say is last year, I was also sitting there at my laptop at work on December the 19th, supposed to be doing something else, clicking refresh on the Treasury website to see what we're actually going to get. Whether Council Isa did the same previous years, I can't remember the last time there was a full government spending review, but certainly for the last 4 or 5 years, we've been in this world of we don't know. We design our budget, we draft our budget, and then we suddenly find out in December whether or not we've got a panic, and usually we haven't. We've usually got it pretty much right, or a little bit of wriggle room. So this isn't new. This isn't a Labour thing. This is a standard government practice for the last probably 6-7 years that we've been in this world of not having a full government spending review. So I wouldn't accuse it of being Labour, because the last government had the same issue for many years. At least Labour have got excuses, they've only just come in.
Councillor McCormack, you want to say something?
Well, yeah, Chair. I mean, I think this is at risk of deviating away from the council budget and onto the government budget. But what I would say is that nobody's noticed the elephant in the room, which is the county council projecting that they're going to go bust in 2026 unless they get more money from central government. And what would be the impact on us if that were the case? Traditionally, we've seen certain county services be cut, and the borough have stepped in to fill the gap. Things like certain bus services, for instance. Has any contingency planning been done to that effect?
We are always monitoring the risks into the future. So we have our MTFS, which gives us an idea of where we are. As I mentioned earlier, we know that the county provides some of the support and a grant to us to support homelessness and housing services. They've indicated they're going to keep that going for a year, fully aware of that. Kate, who's probably in the back of the room, is fully aware of it as well, and looking at what happens. We just walk back into the room. What happens if that happens, and come up with a plan. So we are keeping a watchful eye on it. Say we're not in a position to cover every gap that county may create. There's a debate whether county will be going bankrupt in 1 year or two. And at which point it'll be basic services only. They don't think even running basic services they'll be able to balance their books. So I think at that point we'll be getting to a whole world of what will government do about Hampshire County Council. I'm minorly hopeful that the government will recognise it's not just Hampshire, it's most upper tier authorities, and we'll have to say. But unfortunately, the risk to us is probably more about that extra 1.3 billion was in the budget for supporting councils. I suspect about 1.29 billion of that is going to go to upper tier authorities and unitary authorities, and very little to us. So obviously they know it's a problem, but we won't know until, and say it's the other risk in that full spending review that's going to take place next year, is that actually if there's only so much pie, and there's bigger slices going off to county and going off to unitaries, we might be left with the very crumbs of that pie. So it's nervous times, but say we can't just fill the void of county. And if we did try and fill the void of county, then whatever county services are still running wouldn't be running here, and our residents would be worse off. So we're in a watchful place, but we'll just try and protect the vulnerable as much as we can. But we're not able to be a county council.
Right. Are we now concluding? No, it's that Councillor Carr.
Sorry, just one final comment, and that is it from me. The cabinet member just mentioned then about protecting the vulnerable, and of course one of the elephants in the room of this evening's meeting has been cost of living and the ongoing cost of living pressures that our residents are facing. It struck me looking through the papers that there was no reference to cost of living assistance funding, which had been something that over 3 rounds had provided funding to, as the cabinet member says, some of our most vulnerable in the borough. It would be useful to get a reflection from him as to why there's no reference to COLAF or a similar replacement for COLAF, given conversations about how effective that fund can be. I think I was hoping that there would be something similar to it, and that lessons on the last 3 rounds perhaps had been learned and that a more refined fund might have been put forwards. Instead, there's a reference to an anti-poverty strategy. And what concerns me reading through the papers is this budget's proposing spending, I think it's around £50,000 a year for 4 years on that anti-poverty strategy piece. What is that £50,000 for? How will that be spent? Is that a new member of staff? Is that resourcing? Is that a series of studies? I think if we're taking COLAF off the table, we need to get some clarity about the deliverables behind that anti-poverty funding.
Well, you'll be I mean, one of the first things I'll say is at no point in history has COLAF ever appeared in the November Resources / Scrutiny Committee. COLAF, to give you the history, wasn't in the 2022 budget, but after the revenue outturn in the July Full Council, Councillor Isaac presented the revenue outturn report, there was a £1 million surplus, and so that was decided to put that towards, normally that would go into reserves, but it was put towards COLAF as a 1 year recognising the cost of living increase. Obviously, the big price spikes were after February 22, after the invasion of Ukraine. So that's how it all came about. It was supposed to be 1 year only. So resource-wise, it was sort of one member of staff, generally someone within the building, seconded to do that piece of work. And so it went on. The next time we came round to the 2023 budget, it wasn't in any of the drafts. It was a Councillor McCormack amendment to the budget that was passed, and £1 million that was going to go into the capital programme was withdrawn and used to fund the COLAF scheme for a second year. Obviously, it then came back again as an amendment last year, so it came around for a third time. Now, of course, it was always imagined as a one-off, recognising 2022 was a tough year because of the sharp spikes, extended in 2023 because benefits were still catching up, wages were still catching up with that spike that, you know, inflation was sticky for a lot longer than most people expected. We are in 2024, you've alluded to earlier, inflation is sitting at 1.9%, so actually this year, finally, benefits and wages will be catching up to what is now the new normal. And there is a decision for council about whether or not, I think if we go for a year 4 when inflation is at 1.9%, then we are saying this is a forever service, because if you're not going to get rid of it now, when are you going to get rid of it? So I raise that question. What we are trying to do before we go any further is to actually have a bit of a look at COLAF, because now it's been running for 3 years. We can try and get an idea, because you say it's been very effective, you know, giving away money to people who need it. It's clearly effective to a certain degree. What we've established so far, and obviously we're only halfway through the 3rd year of payments, is that over half the people we've supported have come back again for further support in a subsequent year. So in terms of actually challenging poverty, has it been wholly effective for them? Because clearly they are still in poverty and maybe they needed a different level of support. Was this support the most effective? As I say, it's council taxpayers' money. I've made plenty of commitments in every statement that goes out that my job is to make sure we use every pound of taxpayers' money to the best of its ability. So there's a question mark over COLAF, which we are working through. Is this the most effective way? The new anti-poverty strategy is a slightly separate thing. It's come along, but I think it's actually going to work more effectively probably to tackle poverty in terms of having the housing associations in the room, the CAB in the room. What patterns are we seeing? What themes are we seeing? Having DWP in the room. How many people are coming to us and actually what they really need is someone to help them to make the right claims for benefits? Well, who's the best agency to do that, rather than us giving them a one-off payment that keeps them, helps them out for a week or two, but then they're back in the same situation waiting for COLAF to reopen the following year. Can we actually fix that person's problems and change their lives rather than just changing their weeks? And so that's something that bringing all those people around a table, whether it's looking at school uniform costs, whether it's looking at are people getting the right benefits, are people being ripped up by rogue lenders, etc. All those conversations can happen around the table. And then we put some money into that, looking at housing associations and other agencies to put some money in as well. Are there schemes we can do to support those reoccurring people, those names that keep coming up in Kate's discretionary housing payment bids, in the COLAF bids, they're going to county for their fund as well. Can we help those people better? Because at the moment, and I use the example in full council in answer to your question, that we've got the green team who can save people a fortune on electric and gas and fuel payments by giving them advice on how better to insulate and heat their home. And if I give someone £200 to pay their electricity bill, they can keep the heating on for the rest of the month. If we insulate their houses, they can stay warm forever. And one hasn't cost us as much money, been far more effective. So I think there's a question mark over the effectiveness of COLAF, and I wouldn't want to put it forward to full council if I doubted its effectiveness. We'll know more when we get, obviously, the government announcement. We'll know more when we get the rest of the government information in December to see what else we can do. Would COLAF carry on as it was in my perfect world? It wouldn't, purely and simply because at the moment we are borrowing from the benefits team to one person who's already got a full-time job to try and run this scheme. And if we're going to do it forever, we need to look at the resourcing of it. We need to look at more robust policies around how we manage who gets it, because obviously we can't access data from DWP, we can't access data from other agencies to see if it's going to the right people or is it going to the people who are best at claiming it. So there's lots of question marks around it, around false claims, fake claims, fraud, etc. There's lots of concerns I have around it. As a one-off, it was the right thing to do and absolutely right, but I think if you're going to turn it into something more substantial and long-lasting, then there's a lot more safeguards we'd want around to make sure we protect the public purse. So it's not in there now. I would like us to think of, I'd like the anti-poverty strategy and get those people around the table. They might be able to better advise if there was money, how best to use that to actually generally get rid of poverty rather than just help people cope with it for a few weeks. But
Thank you. Councillor McCormack, you are next, I think.
Oh, thank you, Chair. So in terms of the COLA fund, yeah, I mean, we did have a budget amendment. COLA fund was put in place because people were suffering under the vicissitudes of the open market on fossil fuels, and we were paying higher bills in Britain than many other countries in the Western world. The fuel bills that we had back then are more than twice what they are now. If such a situation develops in the future, then I would like to think we'd be able to head it off at the pass with things like the work of the Green Team, helping people insulate their homes, reduce their dependence on fossil fuels. There was also an impact on food prices as a result of increased transport costs as a result of the increase in cost of fossil fuel. I mean, there are things we could do further in the council, but I'm not sure that budgetary amendments would really cut it. One of the things we could look at is improving, as other councils have done, our ability to grow food locally with local food schemes, more allotments, that sort of thing. I think a piece of work needs doing on that as to the effectiveness of that. The other thing we could look at, and again, this is much more risky, is that's looking at local energy generation schemes and looking at what we might do in the borough for things like wind power, solar panel power. We don't have any big rivers, so hydroelectric's not really an option. But trying to get our residents more energy independent and less dependent on fossil fuel generated electricity and fossil fuels themselves. But I do feel that that is much too big a piece of work to be done by means of budgetary amendments. It is, but it should be a serious aspiration, because other councils, like Glasgow, for instance, done a huge amount of work on community food projects. Other councils have been looking at localised energy schemes, and it could well be that in the rural areas there may be parishes that have got schemes that they want to bring to fruition. But I would interject a note of caution, because it's really, way beyond the normal expectation of us as a council to be going into that thing. But we should consider all options, I think, in terms of making sure that the situation that we had in 2022-23 doesn't happen again. And while it has been attributed to the Ukraine war, that war is still raging, and people are saying it may end soon, it may not. But I think the main thing is we need to do what we can to make sure that our residents are less vulnerable to these things next time around.
Thank you. Councillor Phillimore.
Yeah, going back to picking up costs from Hampshire County Council, and Hampshire County Council are obviously teetering on the brink of bankruptcy, like many other councils in this country, which haven't been funded for 14 years properly by Conservative government. But the point I'm making is, on 103, we are picking up the cost of opening on a bank holiday from Hampshire County Council, waste infrastructure.
That's a charge that we were required to pay. There was not a lot of choice around that. That is
we're paying it now.
Yeah. But that again is across Hampshire as well, so it's not just for us.
Right. Have we concluded our scrutiny of the budget and MTFS draft? Yes, here we are. Yes. And thank you everyone for your questions. I think there's some good scrutiny going on there, and thank you, Portfolio Holder and Chief Financial Officer. And you'll take away, no doubt, some of the comments that have been made this evening. And right, so I think if we move on to the next item, which is the Q2 performance, we've got an array of senior officers here, and thank you for your patience this evening, but it was essential that we made sure that we got through the budget and MTFS as part of the budget process. So what I'm proposing is that we spend most of our time on those KPIs where the target has not been met or has fallen short of the target or is well behind the target, and therefore we can take the KPIs that have been that are on track or have been exceeded. And obviously there's an opportunity tonight for the committee to congratulate those teams that have exceeded targets. It's not all stick, there's some carrot as well. So hopefully we can deal with the targets that have been met and targets that have been exceeded quite quickly. Katie, do you want to just say something about the methodology, because that has obviously changed since our last meeting. We've dropped the RAG approach to looking at these KPIs, and I have to say I think it's something of an improvement, and actually what the committee asked for when we last met.
Thank you, Councillor Isaac. Yes, we've taken on board the clerical feedback, the presentational feedback, and addressed that. It is still very much something we are developing as a council, our approach to performance. But yes, I think this is far clearer in terms of interpreting the information. So I'll hand it back to you.
Right. So, and it's far clearer in terms of what the targets are, and so there's more quantum an assessment of whether these KPIs have been met. You're the portfolio holder this evening for this, Gavin, aren't you? Do you want to say anything in terms of opening remarks, or does Adam want to say anything?
I really don't need to say very much because I'm here with a pen and paper to write down ideas of where we are. I think you'll be quite persuaded where we are just missing that target or well below target. There's generally a very good reason for that. But obviously our aim is always to hit the target. So I'm listening to ideas that come from the committee that would help us on that journey.
So just to summarise, the performance reporting for Q2, we've got 39 measures. 10 are deemed to have exceeded target. 21 have met target or on track. 4 are behind schedule or not met, and 2 have not met and not been met by a significant margin. So can I invite the committee to raise any questions in regard to the measures that have been exceeded or target met, so that we can release those officers after we've been through stage 1 of this? Councillor McCormack.
So I've got 2 questions on the targets met. So the first one is KPI 2.10, household waste recycling rates, where it says, first of all, awaiting data from HCC. So that jumps out at me. You know, how can we be sure we've met our recycling rate if we're awaiting data? And the other is that the indications are that Basingstoke has one of the lowest recycling rates of any council in the country, you know, bottom decile. So that suggests that if we've met our target, then perhaps we set the wrong target. The other thing on KPI 220, fly tipping incidents per 1,000 residents, we've got 2 quarters of information. It says target 18 incidents per 1,000 residents annually. Quarter 1 is 4, quarter 2 is 8, that's 12 for half a year. So that suggests to me that we're on track for 24 per 1,000, and therefore the target would not be met. So I'd like to explore that one as well.
So Helen, can you come up and address that? Thank you very much.
Evening, thank you for the question. So in terms of 2.10 and the delay from Hampshire, it's literally down to the volume of data that they have to review in order to confirm the tonnage. And importantly, as part of that process, one of the things that they do throughout the quarter is they actually do surveys of loads that arrive there for contamination. So we get about 1,500 to 2,000 weighbridge tickets a month, and every single one of those is firstly validated through Veolia at the transfer stations. They then go to Hampshire, who further validate them, and then they come to us. So unfortunately, there is a timing issue, and it might be that I need to amend some of the narrative that I've tried to put on the slide deck. So on the slide, I've tried to sort of explain there's this huge piece of administration work that goes on. It takes between 7 and 8 weeks. We have literally just received the numbers. We're in the process of looking at those now, and then we'll bring those forward. So I apologise that it doesn't tie in with our reporting schedule, but we are very much relying on Hampshire to do all of that groundwork across all of the boroughs and districts.
Thank you. I would. It seems to me we're in a situation where we're never going to be coinciding with the Hampshire cycle. Sorry, Kate.
Sorry, yes, I absolutely agree with you. Can we not just have this on a time slip? Otherwise, we never get to see the data unless, I mean, even at year end, we'll be lagged behind, won't we? So I think perhaps if we just make it clear as to which time period we're on and accept that it's, I don't know, 8 weeks in arrears, would be great. And that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, the other thing that picking up on what Councillor McCormack was asking about was why is it that we think that it's the right target to have 18 incidents per 1,000 residents annually in terms of fly tipping incidents? Wouldn't it be better to perhaps be looking at how many successful prosecutions we make? I don't know, but it just seems an odd target, and I don't know what the science behind it would be.
Can I pass that to my colleague?
Good evening, councillors. So this is the first year that we've included the indicator in terms of the number of fly tipping incidents per 1,000 residents. What happened basically last year, the government consulted on proposals to introduce a number of key performance indicators around fly tipping nationally, and this was one of them. So we picked on this one to sort of start that sort of journey in terms of closely monitoring this as a sort of indicator of the number of fly tip incidents in our borough. It is a target that effectively looks to reduce what we experienced last year in terms of fly tipping. So we've tried to set this as a target to reduce the level of fly tipping that we saw in the previous financial year. It is the first time that we've obviously tracked this one, so we'll learn at the end of the year how effective it is and what it's really showing us. Just coming back on Councillor McCormack's question around what's this actually showing. So in quarter two, it's showing the cumulative figure for the year. So we're currently on 8. If we were to assume that fly tipping incidents continued at the same sort of level for the remainder of the year, we would potentially end up with 16 incidents per 1,000 residents. So that would be within the target which we've set at between 14 and 18 incidents. So hopefully that clarifies your point.
If I just supplement on that, it's difficult to make. I think that's a bit of a dangerous assumption because we don't know with previous quarters whether we've just had a couple of lucky quarters there, and towards the end of the year there may be higher incidences of fly tipping, and we may exceed that 18 incidents per 1,000 residents annually.
And we have got that historic data, and typically trends are lower in the final 2 quarters. You tend to find that there's higher levels during the summer months. I'm not saying that I can predict with 100% certainty what's going to happen, but again, I've got some confidence in saying that I think, if anything, it should be lower. Not promising that though.
And if I could just come in as well, and we're seeking to provide you information as frequently as we can, so to make that best judgment rather than leaving it for just to annually review our fly tip and other such measures.
Thank you. Right, any other questions on the met and exceeded KPIs? Right, okay, thank you very much. For those who are in that category, thank you for your attendance. If we can then move on to those, should we take them in turn? Okay, I'll hand over to you then, Katie.
So it's Daniel up first with his measure for place-based marketing and digital and social media engagement.
Good evening, councillors. I mean, kind of a very quick introduction. So we moved from last year to this year. Before, we used to measure reach, which basically is the number of people that actually see our social media posts. And we felt that measuring engagement was more meaningful because people actually interact to our social media posts. We also moved from an annual target to now kind of reporting quarterly. So therefore, it was quite difficult to crudely divide the annual number by 4 because we know that social media activity varies from month to month and depending on the level of campaigns and number of campaigns. So what the data is showing us, based on historic data as well, is that although we are kind of below where we should be if we divide by 4 crudely, halfway through the year, in fact, we're actually on track to meeting the annual target because we know we've got further campaigns coming through. For example, the Christmas kind of campaigns always generate a lot of engagement. So at the moment, although it's amber, I am fairly confident that we will be on track to meet the annual target. Are there any questions?
Councillor Tuck.
Hi, yes. I mean, I think I know the answers, but are these literally, it could be the same person, sorry, not that many times, but the same person clicking. It's literally the number of clicks. It's not looking at unique identifiers and trying to distill out if you've reached different people. Is there any way one can do that?
No, I'm afraid we can't actually sort of identify who's clicked. So I think what we're measuring basically is interaction. So whether people have liked the social media post, have shared it, have retweeted it, reposted it, kind of that sort of thing. So we kind of basically measure the level of traffic that people and engagement have with our social media campaigns. It's different to sort of, measuring websites.
So there's nothing with that IP address or anything like that?
That would be through websites rather than social media.
Anything else?
At one point, what's interesting about this, Daniel says there's an awful lot of limited control. You can pump stuff out there. Some of it really gets a reaction and some of it doesn't. I think our most watched was jet washing a bench, which got some ridiculous number of views. Very therapeutic to watch, apparently. I would strongly recommend you find it. The other thing that's going to be interesting is with the flow away from X, and I think our Blue Sky account was set up earlier today, recognising that a lot of the traffic has now moved. And so there's that other challenge of, as traffic moves around various social media sites, we've got a real challenge keeping up with that because it's a bit fluid at the moment.
Right, lots of Guardian readers, obviously. Councillor Conquest.
Thank you. It's good to see that you're measuring so many things, but this is quite a broad brush look at the interaction we're getting from the public. It's possible to go into a lot more detail, I'm sure, on some areas. Are you looking at doing that for future reports? And is there any way of looking at, to use the jargon, how many conversions you get into real life activity from this.
So the way we kind of capture the data is we literally sort of measure every single post we put out. And I think, we measure sort of the number of likes, the engagement, the click-through to kind of links. So yes, we could go into a lot more granular sort of data, basically, if you wanted that. But I think at the moment we just kind of give kind of an overview, basically, of our overall engagement, with our social media activity.
There's obviously a balance between wanting to know how far it's going, is it effective, is it reaching people, is it causing a reaction, but also how much it costs in terms of staff time to do that piece of work, and balancing those two things. So if I know there's probably very clever and fancy pieces of software that can do some of it for us, but there's a limit to how much we as an authority want to spend looking at what people are looking at the expense of actually putting it out there. So if you've got an idea of a very simple software, talk to IT and see if they can get it. But it's how much effort, because obviously what difference does it make to how clean we keep the streets? So it's interesting, but we don't want to make it a whole new department. Can't afford it.
Okay, right. Thank you, Daniel. So I think we can go on to the next KPI. Adam.
I'll take this one and the next one, which is the business rates collection. And I think I came obviously in September to talk about the outturn last year. As I said then, the target is very challenging. We haven't changed this target for quite a number of years, whereas nationally there's been a large decrease in collection rates of local authorities, and our rates still are well in the top quartile for both council tax and business rates. Business rates particularly, but also council tax slightly, is impacted by one quite large business that also has some properties that are attracting a 300% charge of council tax, and they are currently not paying those due to various reasons, and I won't go into detail of that for because it's not appropriate in this forum. But the team are obviously working hard to ensure that we take appropriate action to engage with residents, to pursue debt, particularly on council tax, where they are willfully refusing to pay. There are court hearings on a regular basis, and there have been committals to prison in recent years, as well as suspended sentences for that. So we do take it seriously. We obviously engage with those who are particularly challenged as well, to ensure that they're getting the level of support that they require as well. So through council tax support and obviously benefits as well where appropriate. And as you can see, collection rates have improved between quarter one and quarter two, and they do tend to improve as we get towards the year end. Whether we will hit the 99% target, I'm unclear at this stage. They have improved slightly again in October, but yeah, at this stage, I think we will still be in the amber, but we will still be well above nationally in that top quartile of our collection rates.
Any questions for Adam? Councillor Vaux.
Thank you, Adam. And this is a topic that I get correspondence about, and I'm sure other councillors do too. People can get quite upset about the feeling that they're paying their council tax and other people aren't, and that they are being penalised for that in some way or another. And they're always very difficult ones to reply to, and I'm sure you end up composing quite a lot of helpful responses. I notice in this one, in the narrative of it says that local authorities, which I assume means we, will continue to collect outstanding payments after the financial year, and these are not reflected in this metric. So do we know, overall, sort of looking back over previous years, what percentage of council tax we actually do manage to get each year back? Does it get up to that quite tough target of 99%?
I don't have the specifics to hand, but I do know sort of a couple of years back we were over the 99% target, so actually was quite a small amount of historic debt. We do write off some debts where it's not economic to pursue them. Where we can't find those individuals, they are passed to debt collection agencies who will obviously take action to try and recover that on behalf of residents. Because as you point out, it's a quality type piece there where residents quite rightly are paying their fair share and wish to feel that all residents who can are, and obviously it impacts on others. Hampshire County Council and obviously the Fire Authority as well in this. Our share is obviously a relatively small amount of that, but I can certainly have a look and get an answer back for the committee. That's not a problem at all.
Thank you.
Any more? Thank you. Right. Next slide. Right, we've got the Head of Planning, Jenny Jackson. Thank you, Jenny. Do you want to say a few words of introduction to this, please?
Thank you, Chair. So this is the non-major planning applications determined, which is a proxy essentially for speed of decision making on applications. So usually within 8 weeks would be target met. So as the paper sets out, there's a slight reduction in performance in Q2 against the target of greater than 85%. By and large, that was down to annual leave and sickness of 2 members of staff, which has an consequent impact on performance, simply because we don't have the capacity for that work to be moved elsewhere, to be progressed. So as it says, that's by and large the key reason.
Any questions? I've got one. I'm intrigued how the proposal from the government in relation to the NPPF and the removal of extensions of time on domestic planning applications is going to work. How is your department going to manage if that becomes into force, if that comes into force?
I think, Chair, we can manage in that we will just process applications and determine them before that 8-week expiry date. But for me, that's where speed doesn't equal quality in terms of decision or either customer service, because essentially an extension of time is currently used to allow the applicant to make a revision to their application so it's acceptable, and therefore so we can approve it as planning officers or recommend it for approval to the Development Control Committee. So we just won't have the time to do that. So there would be an increase in refusals and an increase in appeals.
Yes, I think that must be the case, isn't it? That you won't have time. There will be information missing, and so you will be faced with having to refuse an application rather than letting something that is a bad application or incomplete go through.
I think I'd agree certainly with the latter, Chair, and then clearly the government does still have the authority or the power to designate planning authorities in relation to speed as well. So yeah, we always have to be mindful of the consequences of, oh well, it's better customer service to allow this person to amend their application, we'll allow it to go over time, could result in us losing the ability to determine applications and they go to the planning inspectorate instead.
Let's hope the government takes note of the consultations that have been no doubt put through to them and come to their senses on that particular point. Any other questions for Jenny?
I've got one on 3.35, Jen, which is the 10% non-major appeals statistic. Firstly, the Q1, the 27.2, that was all committee decisions, was it? Not. That doesn't differentiate between committee and officer decisions, really.
Through you, Chair, no, it doesn't. It's all decisions.
The second one is we're measuring how many appeals are allowed, but we're not measuring how many appeals are denied.
Again, through you, Chair, yes, I think that's a fair point, because again, the government's chosen that as a proxy for quality of decisions. So in the government's view, the number of appeals allowed represents a lesser quality of decision by the planning authority. But clearly that's information that we do have, so if you wanted it, then by all means contact me.
I do feel that as a member of DC, sometimes you're under pressure on these issues, and it'd be nice to have that figure in as well.
Okay, any more?
It does look like some of the text between 335 and 334 has been mixed up, because 334 is major appeals, and then in the text box it says non-major planning applications, and 335 says non-major appeals, and then in the text box it says major planning applications. The take home I have from that is the KPI 334, which is one we were at risk of designation on appeals for major applications. It's reassuring to see that we have 0%, but I'm also conscious that it's a 2-year rolling window. So if we wanted to get a true measure of that, we need to see the historic data going back a longer period of time to see if we are actually on track to come out of the danger zone of being at risk of designation.
Jenny, do you want to respond to that, or do you want to provide us with some data to answer that particular point?
So it's dangerous, Chair, isn't it, to do this off the top of one's head. Yes, there are no qualifying decisions in Q1 or Q2 in relation to appeals. For the April 2022, March 2024 period, whilst there's one appeal decision pending, we already know that we'll be below the 10%. I think currently it's 7%, so that one outstanding decision is not going to take us over the threshold. So we know we're not going to be in that sort of area of at threat of designation. And then for the April 23 to March 25 period, where there's 5 appeal decisions pending at the current time, I think we're in a relatively good position. That said, it does depend how many major applications you also determine, because it's taken against the overall total number of major planning applications. The council determines the number of appeals that it has and then the number of appeals that are allowed. So it's certainly one that we need to keep a weather eye on to be sure that we're broadly in the right ballpark.
Okay, are you all right with that, Councillor McCormack?
Yeah, happy with that, Chair.
Right. Any other questions, Jenny? Nope. Thank you very much, Jenny. So we move on to the next slide. And Adam.
You're probably bored of hearing my voice tonight, but yeah. So this obviously is over the target at the moment. This looks at new housing benefit claims and the processing time. This KPI includes the time from when a application is received. So we do all our benefits processing digitally. So it's a digital form that a claimant submits to the date that it's decided. So that also includes up to a 30-day period where we're requesting information from a resident or a claimant that supports the claim process. So we are partly at the mercy of how long some information takes. Some housing benefit claims are quite complex and it is challenging. The actual days taken from when we've received all the information in this period in Q2 was around 4 days, so a relatively short period. The team are looking at this quite carefully and have implemented some changes in recent weeks, which have brought some of the processing time down for some of the temporary accommodation claims, and that's brought the this KPI down for October down to around 14 days, so back within the target. And they will continue to look at how they do that, and have gone and spoken to other local authorities to understand whether there's anything they can learn from them as well. I'd also like to point out in relation to this KPI, where the payments are made to a social landlord or to a bread and breakfast, or in the case of temporary accommodation, for example, that's obviously been paid not to the claimant, so they're not losing out on that. But if there was a mistake because we processed it too quickly or the information was incorrect that we'd received and made a decision, the overpayment could be clawed back against the claimant, so they would be in a financial disposition there. So it is obviously important that we have a low error rate, which we do, a very, very low error rate in the team. So while it is a negative position at the moment, there is work definitely being done by the team to improve that. And also I think the KPI perhaps needs to be revisited to look at actually the time taken from when we've received all the information from the claimant to making the determination, rather than including a period that could be quite flexible and subject to the complexity of a claim and the responsiveness of that claimant as well. So that's something we'll consider in setting the KPI for next year as well, just to consider whether this KPI is actually measuring the appropriate thing, and something to consider the committee to consider in future.
Okay. Anyone got any comments on that? No? Okay, thank you. So we now move on to Sarah Cragg. Thank you, Sarah. So we got the head of human resources with us. Sarah, can you talk to this, please?
Absolutely. Thank you, Councillor Isaac. So as you'll see from the narrative, this KPI is about measuring the average work days lost due to sickness absence. Clearly, the organisation doesn't expect individuals to be attending work when they're not well enough to do so, but obviously our level of sickness absence that's too high can impact our ability to deliver services, so it's really important that it's something that we monitor and continue to focus on. As you'll see from the KPIs, in Q1 we were below the target, and in Q2 we're above the target. The nature of sickness absence is something that it can be quite difficult to predict, and also is very difficult to maintain at a static level because of the nature of individuals becoming unwell. I think what I would say though, and I think it's really important to share with the committee, is that this is something that we continue to focus on. So in the narrative you'll see that the majority of sickness absence in that period of Q2 was long term, so above 20 days. Of those individuals who were absent for 20 days or more during that Q2 period, and there were 22 of those individuals, only 3 of them currently remain off sick as at today. So this is not a reflection of individuals remaining off sick for months and months and months at a time. This is something that, as I say, we continue to focus on and support individuals to come back to work as soon as they are well enough to do so. But obviously, as is the case in wider society, we do have individuals who are recovering from significant illnesses or receiving active treatment for ongoing underlying conditions, and sometimes that does necessitate a period of absence from work. But it is something that we continue to focus on and support managers to actively manage with staff.
Any questions? Councillor McCormack.
Thank you, Chair. So evidently it's a sensitive topic, and we can't expect people to come to work ill. They might make other people ill, or they might not get better quicker if they're coming into work ill. I'm just wondering if we would like, as a committee or maybe even as a council, to get some more information as to the underlying causes of this and see what we can do as a council to address this, because I know that there have been challenges across the board in the employment market in Britain post-pandemic, and we do have a much higher instance of health and well-being problems in the past 5 years. But I would like to think that as a council, we are an employer that looks after our employees' well-being, and I'd very much like to know, is there something more that we can do to address this situation and make the council a better place to work for employees and to improve employees' health and well-being.
So I would say again, as I sort of tried to allude to in the narrative, there's a whole range of different things that we provide in terms of support from staff. So everything from face-to-face counselling, which again is something that isn't universally offered. Quite often it's sort of telephone or virtual, but there is a face-to-face option for staff. We have 24/7 access to an employee assistance programme. We have an occupational health service that are very actively involved in supporting members of staff, but we are always looking at what additional things we can do. We do report twice a year to HR committee, and within that we do report sickness absence, including sickness absence by reason. So again, I'm very happy to share that data with this committee as well if that's useful. Clearly we don't go down to anywhere near individual levels because of the sensitivity of the type of topics that we're talking about, and it's really important that individuals' confidentiality is protected, but we do look at what those sort of general reasons for absence are, and we do look at things like our wellbeing programme to take account of that. So nationally, for example, sickness absence associated with mental ill health is the highest reason. That's the case across the country. Again, that has been the case here for a number of years. So again, that's a key focus of our wellbeing programme. So again, we do look at what we do and using the data to help us direct where our sort of interventions and support should be, as well as offering things like counselling and EAP, which are sort of a general support mechanism available to all staff at any point.
Right, any other questions? I've got a comment. Just that clearly we must be, and I'm sure are, a good employer. But you've registered the seriousness of this statistic tonight, and if one applies it across the whole, the totality of staff, it over a year, it equates to every member of staff having 8.5 days sickness. So it is significant. So my questions are: what impact does this have on staff members, and what are we doing to help staff members who are having to do additional work as a result of the absences? The second question is how do we compare with comparable boroughs in terms of this?
So I think in relation to individual teams and services, obviously the impact to those can vary depending on the length of absence and the size of the team. Jenny, when she was talking about planning, for example, alluded to some absence within her team and the impact of that. So I wouldn't suggest that there's never an impact, but again, that will vary on a case-by-case and service basis. Clearly, we do offer as much support as we can to managers in terms of making sure that they're supporting other staff in the team and looking at if work does need to be reallocated, what that looks like. But obviously, we are also offering that support to the individuals that are absent, because clearly we don't want individuals to return to work until they're well enough to do so. In terms of the wider benchmarking, that's something that I can provide separately if that's of interest to the committee.
That would be helpful, actually, Sarah, if you would be kind enough to do that. Councillor Tony Jones.
Just a quick one. The guys and girls, men, women who work out cutting grass or outside, is there a higher sickness rate? And is there a longer length sickness rate? It's be quite interesting.
I wouldn't say necessarily a longer length, but certainly we do typically see a higher sort of percentage within some of those kind of areas. And again, that's something that we do report to HR committee. So again, I'm happy to kind of duplicate the information that's shared with them to this committee if that's useful, because we do look at sickness by type, we do look at sickness by business unit and how that compares against the average. But again, what I would say is if you're in a team of 5 people and one of those individuals is off sick, then clearly that has a big impact in terms of the sickness level of that team. If you have one individual who's off in a team of 30, I'm not suggesting that isn't just as important and we need to be as supportive, but clearly in terms of the figures, that will look very different. So again, with all of these, it's important to kind of understand those nuances.
I'll just come back on that. you compare them with other boroughs, obviously, at some stage, don't you? But how can you? Because a lot of boroughs, those works are done by contractors, and that's the point. Perhaps we are a bit higher because of that. We got our own service.
Inevitably, comparisons can be quite difficult because, again, there are a number of different ways that you can measure things like sickness. So you can measure it in work days, you can measure it in calendar days, you can measure it in overall percentages. And again, lots of organisations will measure it in quite different ways. There isn't a set standard around how you have to measure it, which again does make those comparisons slightly tricky. I think it's useful to have that benchmarking information. I think for us, we're always looking at year-on-year information. So Q2 last year was also our highest of the 4 quarters. So again, we're also comparing against ourselves as well as comparing others in terms of what that's looking like. And again, for us, it's making sure we keep sort of track of who those individuals are, what support we're offering, and also how we can best get people back to work as soon as they're well enough to do so. So yes, direct comparisons can be quite difficult with all of these things. The data is helpful, but it's understanding the caveats around that is really important because it can give a slightly skewed view.
Okay, any further questions? Councillor Hawkes.
Thank you, Chair. I just wondered if we had, or if you had, any means of telling what the impact of flexible working, particularly sort of post-COVID, hybrid working home and the office, and whether that had any impact at all on sickness absence.
It's a really difficult one to pick up because I think part of the challenge was our sickness was a lot higher during COVID because of COVID, and then you had our introduction of hybrid working at the same time as COVID became less prevalent, so you saw a drop. It wasn't always clear exactly what that was due to. Sickness absence levels are broadly in line with where they were pre-COVID, so it doesn't appear to be that has been the case. And again, in some ways, I think that's potentially a positive reflection because actually if individuals aren't well enough to work, they should feel able to say that they're not well enough to work rather than feeling like because they can work from home, they almost have to work when they're not well enough to do so. But again, that is something that we kind of monitor because I think there is that risk.
Okay, anyone got anything else? Yeah.
Just to make the point that I wasn't implying it could be a negative thing. Hybrid working for some mental health issues may be a positive thing. So it was whether it's so tenuous, but I just wanted to know if there was any chance of any possibility of measuring the positive or negative. And you don't have to reply. I just wanted to make sure that you understood I wasn't suggesting it was a negative thing. Thanks.
If I may, though, I think it's really helpful because I think when we look at people with, for example, long-term conditions, we quite often have conversations around flexibility. We have staff, for example, who have different working patterns across full-time, part-time. So hybrid working is a part of that sort of flexibility piece, but it isn't the only one. So again, it is important that we have those conversations in relation to individuals' sort of personal circumstances to balance that against the need to deliver our services. So absolutely, that is part of the picture.
Right, thank you very much, Sarah. Thank you. I think we've concluded the part that involves you, Adam, and Councillor Gavin James. Thank you very much for your attendance tonight. And there's one item left for us to look at, which is the review of the work programme. Ellie, can I turn to you?
Yeah, so the work programme is pretty similar to what came last time. There's just one change, which is the Future Economy Framework has now moved to March. And just to ask if there's any suggestions for future work programme items.
Any thoughts? So one thing that you and I discussed was, because it's within our remit, is the I'm sorry, Katie, I haven't had a chance to talk to you about this, so forgive me. But just to look at customer services and you know, an update from your team on customer services.
In what aspects of it?
Well, how well it's performing, and what sort of issues you're dealing with, and what sort of comments we get from residents, because and how easy they find communicating and dealing with us is. I know that these are things that are sort of covered by the KPI, but it's sort of digging a bit deeper than that. Yeah.
Chair, I'm just mindful that Councillor Mamoleni talked about being able to track as councillors customer inquiries from residents, so that they were able to be informed about how, you know, what their residents were contacting the council about and progress with them. I gather it. I mean, people that are double hatters here. I don't know if we've got any double hatters here. Talk about how the county council is possible to track that, and I think the councillor felt that it was something that the borough had said they were going to introduce at some point. But so I think an update on what the thoughts are about that would be really helpful. Thank you.
So, would it be unreasonable to expect you to be able to deliver that by the date of the next meeting in January, or are we looking at March?
No, I could certainly give you. Sorry, no, I could certainly give you quite a lot of information across customer services, because we'll be able to include the contact centre, the website, some more information on complaints. So I feel it may lead to other questions, but I'd be able to give you a good insight into what's going on in customer services.
So are we content that that should form the agenda item in January? Okay, seems to be. Given the thumbs up. Good. Sorry to spring that on you. Right, Councillor Carr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's probably just a broader reflection about, obviously we're under a new set of committees now with slightly different remits. And it is clear, both from this conversation and previous conversations, the remit of this committee is quite narrow. And one wonders whether the number of committees is perhaps still too large, and whether there's some reflection if, you know, we've got some committees like Environment and Infrastructure that have a very significant work programme and perhaps struggle with sort of, you know, councillor capacity to review that material, whether perhaps we'd be better off with fewer slightly larger committees than what the current setup we have now. I think it's just worth reflecting on given this work programme conversation.
It's a good point, but what we could also perhaps do, officers will tell us whether this is going to offend some rule or not, but we could actually talk to the chair of the other committees and say, well, look, if you've got too much to deal with, we've got spare capacity, and we might be able to look at some certain topics that you can't fit in.
I was just going to say, obviously, we have the quarterly chairs meetings where we do discuss the work programmes and things, but we have sort of discussed it informally as a team about how the workload is shared. So I'll take that back to the monitoring officer.
Good, thank you very much. I think that concludes the evening. Thanks everyone for your attendance and safe journey home.